April 12, 1945. Baguio, Philippines. The rain-soaked ground offered no comfort as 24 Japanese women, hands trembling and lips quietly moving in prayer, knelt in the mud of a fenced compound. Their faces mirrored exhaustion, despair, and grim resolve. For months, they'd survived near starvation, disease, and the agony of waiting. Now they awaited execution. Or so they believed. The sky smeared ash and gunmetal grey. American voices rattled the silence, and the women braced themselves for a brutal end. Everything they'd ever learned, everything their commanders and propaganda had drilled into their hearts, told them this was the moment of reckoning. The enemy was merciless. The enemy was monstrous. But just as the gates swung open, everything changed. Call to action. Help reveal forgotten history. Before you discover the shocking truth behind this extraordinary morning, make history with us. Smash that like button if stories like this move you. Subscribe right now to History of Army for tales that challenge every assumption. Drop your location in the comments, whether you're tuning in from Dallas, Detroit, or Tokyo. Your voice helps keep these stories alive, helps us uncover what textbooks never dared to tell. War, propaganda, and the power of belief. To understand this harrowing morning, we must flash back to the previous autumn. October 1944. General Douglas MacArthur's forces stormed the Philippines, fulfilling his famous vow. I shall return. Japanese troops, once confident, found themselves isolated, hunted, and pushed from every side. Among those scattered defenders were roughly 200 Japanese women. Nurses, communication specialists, clerks, and so-called comfort station managers. Each carried a heavy burden. Japanese military doctrine was clear. Capture meant disgrace. Surrender was worse than death. Officers swallowed cyanide if cornered. Soldiers clutched grenades, not for enemies, but for themselves. For women in uniform, the terror was doubled. Japanese propaganda made American GIs out to be monsters, sadists with no mercy for captives, especially for women. Those fears were carefully planted. Radio broadcasts, fake films, staged atrocities. Over and over they were told. Americans would torture, rape, and kill them. Surrender was not an option. Death was preferable. Forgotten nurses and their ordeal. Come March 1945, the Americans advanced into the mountains above Baguio. Many Japanese units faded into the jungle, fighting as guerrillas. But around 24 women, survivors from a field hospital, nurses, 3 communications officers, and some administrative staff, were cut off, lost, alone. For weeks they hid in abandoned buildings, caves, and whatever shelter they could find. Scavenged roots, muddy water, and constant dread were their only companions. Sergeant Michiko Tanaka, a battle-hardened nurse, scribbled desperate entries in her diary. No food, no medicine. Fumiko burning with fever. Americans close. Maybe tonight. This ends soon. Hope had crumbled. Survival became a bleak ritual. Then, instead of a violent clash, their capture arrived with exhaustion. American patrols. Led by Private Robert Chen, a first-generation Nisei soldier fluent in Japanese, discovered the women huddled like frightened animals. Uniforms torn. Bare feet caked with mud. Instead of pleading for mercy, they closed their eyes and waited for death. The soldiers expected combat, but found ghosts. Inside the detention compound. The women were taken to a temporary holding camp just outside Baguio. It was far from a fortified POW facility. Mostly tents, barbed wire, a water tap. American guards, young and mostly unprepared for the task, followed the Geneva Convention, secure the perimeter, prevent escapes, ensure basic humanitarian care. But trauma ran deep. The women refused to eat, convinced every meal was poisoned. Young nurse Fumiko Sato described it chillingly. We believed they fed us only so torture would last longer. We were mice, and they played with us. Malnutrition, dysentery, and pneumonia ravaged the group. Lieutenant Yoshiko Nakamura struggled to maintain some shred of discipline. But order meant little. Military pride had been replaced by a quiet drift towards death. Outside the wire, American trucks thundered, carrying food and ammunition to troops at the front. Inside, 24 forgotten women clung to memories of the monster Americans, convinced mercy was a lie. The day everything changed. At dawn on April 12th, Captain William Morrison strode through the camp. He'd been a high school history teacher before the war, a man transformed by months of brutal combat. Morrison was seasoned in the art of separating emotion from duty. He'd lost friends. He'd seen death up close. The enemy was just a word. But when Morrison gazed into the haunted eyes of starving, broken women, something shattered. These were not monsters. These were not devils. They were people, stripped bare by fear and propaganda. His interpreter, Private Chen, explained. The women believed execution was imminent.
that the rare servings of rice and dried fish were part of a cruel ritual before torture. Morrison listened and made an instantaneous, radical decision, one never written in any manual of war. He turned to his sergeant. "Get breakfast. Real breakfast. Everything we can spare." Soon, the aroma of fresh bread, canned meats, sweet fruit cocktail, coffee, and chocolate drifted over the camp. American soldiers wheeled in crates. One by one, the Japanese women stared, uncomprehending. Tears welled up. Sergeant Machiko, trembling, approached and questioned through Chen. "Is this poisoned?" Morrison took a can, split it open, ate a mouthful, and handed it back. "It's real," he promised. "You're not going to die today." What followed was a quiet shockwave. The women advanced slowly, guarding hope like a precious jewel. The youngest picked up chocolate and cradled it with awe. Some devoured bread, some shared with the sick. In that moment, everything they believed about Americans, and about war, began to unravel. Human kindness in the heart of chaos. Over the next days, Morrison fought bureaucracy and convention, bringing medical supplies, clean water, and canvas for shelter. Army medics treated Fumiko's pneumonia. Dysentery faded. The compound grew from a prison into a place where dignity could be reborn. As the women ate and regained strength, walls built over years began to fracture. Color returned to their faces. Some even learned simple English phrases. One stormy afternoon, Private Yuki, just 20 thou, shared shelter with American guards beneath a tarp. As rain thrummed above, she softly said, "Same rain, same sky." For the first time, both sides laughed together. The silence of absolute hatred cracked. Small moments. Sharing cards, cigarettes, stories, photographs of families. Changed everything. Some American soldiers privately wrestled with their own confusion. "We're supposed to kill them," Private Walsh argued one night. "But here, we're supposed to be nice. Where's the line?" His friend Rodriguez answered, "Maybe there isn't a line. Maybe that's the point. Breaking the cycle of dehumanization." By late April, something remarkable emerged. Not friendship exactly, but mutual recognition. The enemy became human. The Japanese women taught guards how to say basic phrases in Japanese. The Americans taught English. Nurses shared medical expertise. Officers collaborated on day-to-day tasks. Formal barriers, built by politics, war, and decades of indoctrination, faded bit by bit. Nurse Machiko consulted with American medics, her knowledge respected. Lieutenant Yoshiko and Morrison discussed logistics. The bitterness of war did not vanish, but a shared respect grew in the smallest daily gestures. The sense of something extraordinary happening grew each day. Not just survival, not just peace, but something more shocking. Real mercy between supposed enemies. Transfer and farewell. In May, the war in the Philippines was almost over. Defensive lines broke. Survivors scattered. Morrison received orders. The women would be moved to a larger facility in Manila. The small compound would dissolve. The brittle community, forged in chaos, had to say goodbye. The night before the move, Morrison gathered the women. Through Chen, he explained they would get medical care, proper housing, and after peace, repatriation to Japan. Sergeant Machiko spoke. "Will you be there?" Morrison shook his head. "No. My unit leaves tomorrow." She bowed. The other women bowed, not in submission but in respect and thanks. The next morning, trucks arrived. Each woman said goodbye to soldiers who had been her jailer, her savior, her teacher, her fellow survivor. Lieutenant Yoshiko shook Morrison's hand. "You showed us," she said, slowly, in English, "that everything we were told was wrong." Morrison nodded. "Maybe that's the real victory. Learning the enemy is just people. Manila's routine, and lingering trauma." In Manila, the women found a barracks with hundreds of prisoners, military and civilian. There were nurses, mess halls, a proper infirmary, but the intimacy of the Baguio camp was lost. Bureaucracy returned. Psychological wounds lingered long after physical ones healed. Many, like Nurse Fumiko, faced nightmares. She dreamed the Americans were monsters again. Unsure which reality was true, Army psychologists diagnosed severe cognitive dissonance. For Lieutenant Yoshiko, an officer by lifelong training, the crisis was deeper. Her commanders had abandoned her. Her enemies had shown more honor. She spent hours in the tiny facility library, searching for meaning in Japanese texts. Yuki, barely out of girlhood, adapted best. Making friends with American nurses, teaching Japanese, learning more English. She was building new meaning from the ruins. The war's end, a second chance. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Tears, disbelief, grief, and relief swept the camp. For some, surrender was impossible. Others sobbed openly. Sergeant Machiko listened to the radio, tears running, unsure if it marked defeat, freedom, or both. Months passed before repatriation. The women waited in Manila, writing letters home, struggling to explain what happened. When finally placed aboard a U.S. Navy transport, Lieutenant Yoshiko was asked by Captain Hayes, "What will you tell people?" She answered, "I'll tell them. The enemy taught me more about honor than my own commanders." Back in Japan, devastation reigned, cities burned.
Families torn apart by war's dissonance, Machiko found her family alive, her village in ruins. Her mother urged silence. But Machiko refused. She worked as a nurse, telling patients about the American who'd offered bread instead of death. Some doubted, some understood. Yoshiko and her husband, a naval officer, faced painful reconnections. She had learned Americans were human. He had fought them as enemies. Over time, they found peace and truth in exhaustion. Yuki, now 20, found purpose as an English teacher in Yokohama. She told her students, "I learned English from the enemy. They taught me that enemies can become teachers." Final reunion and unforgettable lessons. In 1947, 15 survivors reunited in Tokyo, sharing a modest meal. Yoshiko toasted survival. Fumiko added a tribute to the men who showed survival can be honorable. Yuki whispered, "To second chances." Machiko spoke the words that would echo forever, to remembering, so we never forget what humanity looks like, even in war. By 1982, only a few remained. Machiko, now 73, showed her wartime diary to a young historian. "The Americans brought us food," she said. "How do we make sense of enemies who feed us?" She paused. "The worst lies make us forget that other people are human." Morrison, the captain who'd ordered breakfast, reflected, "No medals, no headlines, just breakfast instead of bullets." Today, only a simple stone in Tokyo marks the story of those women whose humanity survived a war dedicated to destroying it. If you're moved by the astonishing courage and compassion in the darkest of times, share this story. Add your voice to the call for truth and humanity. Subscribe to History of Army now and help us unveil more stunning truths that history tried to bury. Your support is our lifeblood. Let's make history together.